Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's Mr. Brown again. Today I'm giving the directions on the art assignment. So we went over this in class this week. We have been talking about Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and nonviolent protests. And we've watched videos, we've watched, read things, and we've also looked at how art can be a message against violence. And so you are now going to create your own art piece. You can use any medium you want. It could be a pencil drawing, it could be a sketch with markers and pens, it could use crayons, it could be watercolors, it could be oil paints, pastels, it could use sculpture, it could be made out of clay, it could be made out of popsicle sticks, it could be made out of cardboard, it could be made out of recycled materials, it could be made out of anything. Your goal is to spread the message of nonviolence. So we have talked about Martin Luther King Jr., and so if he had not been assassinated, if he was still alive today, what do you think his message would look like to people? What would you create to tell the world that nonviolence is the answer? And so that is your mission. Any art form is acceptable. We'll try to post these on the walls when we get back to school. Um, Anything you want to create. It could be colorful, it could be not colorful, it could be stencils, it could be cartoon, it could be whatever you want. We have went over all this in class, but in case you missed it, that's what we're going to go over again. So these are some things that hopefully will give you inspiration. So yesterday or today's question of the day was, um, what is the name of this painting and who made it? So this is, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Guernica. And Guernica is a painting that was made by Picasso, Pablo Picasso. He was Spanish, and at the time he was famous and living in France. But we talked about in class how there was a civil war, and a group was trying to take over the government. And so they were led by a fascist dictator, uh, a general. And so he was um, trying to take over the government. And it was a very deadly civil war. And General Franco, what he did was teamed up with another dictator or fascist, which was Hitler. So he teamed up with Hitler and asked Hitler to help him overthrow the government. Hitler, of course, was all about that and spreading fascism. And so Hitler also, bombs were new, and he wanted to test out his bombing and bomb theories. And so what he did was he made a deal and they bombed a innocent city called Guernica, and this town was bombed and bombed and bombed. And we read about the bombing of it on this Khan Academy assignment, which I posted. And so that talked about the painting and everything and when it came out and that it was anti war. And this is what the city looked like when the bombing was over. I think it said 75% of all the buildings were gone, one third of the population was killed, as hundreds and thousands of pounds of bombs were dropped on them. They weren't a war city or a significant military city. It was just really the Nazis were experimenting to see how they could be the most deadly. And so this became a horrible worldwide incident. And so we talked about how Pablo Picasso made this painting to show the ugliness of the war and how horrible it was on innocent people. And we talked about um, the innocent people are all in white because they're innocent, how this painting was made to be disturbing and confusing and chaotic, and because it wants to show how the bombing was so chaotic. There's this mother with her child who had died. There's this lady who's in a house that's on fire. You can see the flames everywhere. And we have this light, which is shining in this dark room, and people looking to the light and trying to find light in the darkness. So that is a famous painting from 1937, and it has a lot of meaning. If you need to reread all that stuff, it is on the roadmap. Here are a few others that also came from this time. Um, during the Civil War. And unfortunately, General Franco does take over Spain, and he remains a dictator for, I think it ended up being 30 years until they finally overthrow him. Here's another very famous painter, Miro, who um, I love his paintings because they always have these weird little creatures in them. I think they're creatures. I don't know what they really are supposed to be. But he was also during this time, and this is also a protest painting. We talked about in class how you might think to yourself, well, I'm not a good painter. Well, I would argue that this guy might not have been a very accurate painter either. Look at the eyes are just dots, and a circle or a wire makes their nose. So it's not about um, skill, it's about the message. Here's another poster that was made to join the resistance in France and overthrow the Nazis. Again, just cutting out images and then changing the colors. Here is a famous artist who made some MLK paintings. And again, you don't have to be very skilled in the features and detail because that's not really what art is about. Here's another one, which is looking at the 60s civil rights movement. And so you could see the army with their weapons and the children with their books. So it's a battle of knowledge versus weapons, and very simple colors, um, just spread around, not like fancy detailed skills required. Here's another painting of the famous painting of Martin Luther King Jr. letter from a Birmingham jail. One of the times he was arrested, he wrote a letter, and so that's a famous document. And there's a version of the painting of that. Here is another one where, again, you don't have to have a lot of skills. You can see these faces are 90% the same. It's all about the message and the colors and what they're saying. This is from a comic book, and so even a message could be in that form. And you could see this is Captain America, the new Captain America, when the Falcon takes over. And so he has his speech bubble as he's fighting the Red Skull, who is the Nazi. And he says, I'm not perfect, but I was never that person. I am Sam Wilson, raised by Paul and um, Darlene Wilson to fight people like you for a better world. And like it or not, Nazi, I am Captain America. And so there's kind of that symbolism or metaphor there that America is not perfect and it was never meant to be perfect. It's just fighting to be a better world. And and that's kind of the message that I get out of that. So another interesting one. These are stencil art. So Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi, and just stencils and then some nice colors over it. This is a Banksy, one of my favorites, which is called the Thrower. And so it's this rioter, and instead of throwing rocks or Molotov cocktails, he's throwing flowers. And it's kind of this message of maybe we should be as passionate and motivated to spread love as we are to rip things down. Here's another one with hearts coming out of the tank, sending the love, bombing with love. This one is famous, actually, a photograph from the 60s of a lady who put a daisy, a peace daisy, in a gun when they were protesting, and the police had weapons on them. And so that's kind of a remake of that, changing things to good or peace will stop violence. This is a very famous sculpture of a gun twisted in a knot, and this is part of the nonviolence movement that we don't need to hurt each other. Maybe we could stop that. Here is a famous Colorado artist, and his message is words are more powerful than weapons, and it's words that people should be afraid of. And so he takes apart typewriters and then rebuilds them in the shape of guns so that you could see this idea that we shouldn't be shooting people, we should be educating people. And then he has another one which also talks about that when these are empty bullet shells, but in the end, on the end of them, they're actually calligraphy pens. So the power of writing, the power of the word, the power of sharing ideas. This is another one, which is a famous symbol of the fist. And we talked about in class the idea of the fist goes back throughout the 20th century. The idea that alone we are just a finger and we can't stop someone, but together all those fingers can make a fist, and that fist could stop someone or stop uh, injustice. And those are kind of the end. We talked about how this artist, who's a friend of mine, cuts parts out of comic books and then layers them together in a way he wants, and then puts words there. And then we talked about this image, which is like an image made up of images. So this one just happens to be a crow, but think of the power it would be if it was doves or some nonviolent sign. So hopefully those things inspired you and gave you some ideas. So again, your project, you are creating a message to the world of nonviolence, and you could create that however you want, however you want. Spread nonviolence instead of violence. So stopping the violence, stopping the hate. Okay. Um, that is all I have for you. Hopefully, you guys are having a good time, and we will talk to you later. Okay. Bye bye. Remember to subscribe.